This is the moment a cheating boxer got caught on live television. It's one of the most shameful and tragic fights in the history of boxing that left one fighter dead and the other behind bars. On June 16, 1983, Luis Resto and Billy Collins Jr. fought at Madison Square Garden. The two boxers were in very different periods of their career. Collins at the time was a rising star. The 21-year-old had the potential to be a contender, winning all 14 of his professional fights with 11 knockouts. Boxing was in Collins' blood. The son of a working-class Tennessee boxer of Irish descent, he was quickly becoming a fan favorite and a potential challenger for the world title.
He was on his way to becoming a contender. When he stepped into the ring, he had the personality, the charisma, the karma that the fans just really eat up.
With his father as his trainer, Collins entered the ring that day as the safe bet. But things went tragically wrong for the young athlete. Luis Resto, the man who would face Collins in the ring, was a 28-year-old boxer born in Puerto Rico and raised in the Bronx. After 30 professional fights, his record stood at 19 wins and 8 losses, but it was his 8 knockouts that stood out. Resto wasn't known for his punching power. In fact, he was often seen as more of a technical fighter, relying on his endurance and skill to outlast opponents rather than knocking them out cold. Despite his solid career, Resto was never viewed as a potential superstar. Instead, he was seen as a stepping stone for up-and-coming fighters, someone they could beat to prove they had what it took to make it to the top. Resto's troubled past added layers to his story. As a child, he struggled with behavioral issues and even ended up receiving psychological treatment after an incident in 8th grade where he elbowed his math teacher in the face. It was clear that Resto had some issues to work through, but he found boxing as a way to channel his anger and frustration. Slowly, boxing became his outlet, and he was able to turn it into a career. He was coached by Panama Lewis, a controversial figure in the sport whose reputation would later be forever tied to this scandal. Despite Collins being the favorite, it was clear from the moment the fight started that this was going to be no walkover.
If there's any edge at all, I would have to give it to Collins. I think he takes a little better punch than Luis Resto, and I think he punches a little harder with one punch.
Resto came out strong from the very first bell, showing a level of aggression that immediately took Collins by surprise. Although Resto wasn't known for his knockout power, it quickly became clear that his punches, which were usually softer, were landing with an unusual intensity. Collins, typically composed and resilient, began to show signs of struggle almost instantly.
But as the fight wore on, his face began to bruise up. Every time he got hit by Luis Resto, it was like Resto's fists left an impression made.
By the time the fight had entered the middle rounds, Collins' face was already showing the toll of the punishment he was taking. Despite his best efforts to hold on, Collins was slowly being broken down, and it seemed like the fight was slipping further out of his control.
If these are the kind of punches, Tim, that can be detrimental to a fighter's career.
The fight was completely one-sided from start to finish, but Collins didn't back down for a second. He absorbed punch after punch, refusing to go down, and somehow made it through all 10 grueling rounds. By the time it was over, his face was so battered it was barely recognizable. When the judges announced a unanimous decision in favor of Resto, it left everyone wondering how this usually light-hitting boxer had managed to deal such a brutal beating. But as Resto was celebrating his surprise victory, he shook hands with Collins' trainer and father in the middle of the ring. It quickly became apparent what was wrong. As soon as Collins' father touched Resto's gloves, the former boxer knew that something was off. The authorities were immediately notified, and Resto's gloves were examined. It was quickly discovered that Resto's gloves had been tampered with. Up to half the padding in the gloves had been removed and replaced with chalk, allowing Resto to inflict considerable damage to Collins' face. When confronted, both Resto and his trainer denied knowing anything about the tampering, but suspicions quickly pointed to Resto's trainer, Panama Lewis, as the likely mastermind behind the whole thing. Despite their denials, many believed it was no coincidence that Lewis had a reputation for bending the rules. The fight's result was eventually overturned and declared a no contest, but that probably didn't mean much to Collins after everything he'd been through. By the end of those brutal 10 rounds, his eyes were completely swollen shut, and his face was a mess of cuts and bruises. He could barely see and knew deep down that something wasn't right. This wasn't just a bad loss, it felt different. The damage he had taken was potentially life-changing.
And he was crying and he said, I've been beat up bad. You don't realize how bad I've been beat up. He said, I'm blind, I can't see, and I think I'm gonna die.
The damage from the fight was devastating. Collins suffered a torn iris and permanent blurred vision, injuries that officially ended his boxing career. Even though he was being heavily punished, he refused to quit, pushing through round after round. Shockingly, the referee never stepped in to stop the fight, even as the injuries piled up. After the fight, things only got worse for Collins. With his career suddenly over, he spiraled into a deep depression. He turned to alcohol, but that only made things worse. He became more violent and angry, and his personal life began falling apart. His relationship, already strained, started to crumble under the weight of everything he was going through.
Things started getting worse and worse between us. Started hitting me a lot, and He would cry for days. He did drugs. He drank.
Less than a year after the fight, tragedy struck. Collins was killed in a car accident near his home in Tennessee. While the official cause was ruled an accident, many of his family members believed otherwise, claiming his death was likely a suicide. It seemed like the aftermath of the fight had taken an unbearable toll on him. By 1986, justice finally caught up with Resto and his trainer, Panama Lewis. Both were put on trial and found guilty of assault, conspiracy, and possession of a weapon. In this case, Resto's hands were considered weapons since the gloves he used weren't properly padded. Prosecutors argued that Resto had to have known the gloves were illegal, making the fight essentially an illegal 10-round assault. To make matters worse, prosecutors revealed a deeper motive behind the scheme. They claimed the tampering wasn't just about winning, it was about money. Allegedly, a third party had placed a large bet on Resto to win and had even met with Lewis before the fight to set the whole thing in motion. The scandal went far beyond the ring, turning what should have been a fair fight into a criminal conspiracy.
I suspect that there were heavy bets made on a knockout, on a win, and that someone somewhere decided, hey, if we can on this guy, let's make some money on him and get rid of him.
Both men were found guilty for their roles in the scandal. Resto received a 3.5-year prison sentence, while Lewis was sentenced to 6 years. On top of that, both were permanently banned from professional boxing, effectively ending their careers. Meanwhile, Collins' family tried to find justice in the courts. They filed lawsuits against Lewis, Resto, the referee, and the fight's promoters, but the courts ultimately ruled against them, leaving the family without any legal resolution. For 25 years after the fight, Resto stuck to his story, claiming he had no idea the gloves had been tampered with. But eventually, the truth came out. He admitted his guilt and even apologized to Collins' widow. In a shocking confession, he revealed that not only had Lewis removed the padding from the gloves, but he had also soaked Resto's hand wraps in plaster, making them rock hard and even more dangerous. Although his professional career was over, Resto didn't disappear from the boxing world entirely. He spent time training young fighters at the same gym where he had once trained himself. He even picked up some work as a cornerman, though he faded into relative obscurity over the years. Later, he appeared in a documentary about his life, where he opened up about the fight and expressed deep guilt and shame for his role in what had happened. It was clear that the scandal continued to haunt him long after the gloves came off.
1983 was the best year of your life,
Yeah,
but also the worst year of your life.
that was the best year and the worst night.
Panama Lewis maintained his innocence until the day he died. He consistently denied any wrongdoing, insisting that others were responsible for removing the padding from Resto's gloves and soaking his hand wraps. Despite the overwhelming evidence and his reputation as a shady figure in the boxing world, Lewis never took accountability. He passed away in 2020 at the age of 74, leaving behind a legacy forever tainted by the events of that fight. The scandal sent shockwaves through the boxing community and changed the sport forever. In response, new regulations were introduced to make sure something like this could never happen again. These stricter rules included more thorough inspections of gloves and hand wraps before and after fights. The tragedy served as a grim reminder of the importance of safety in the ring, ensuring that future fighters would never have to endure what Collins did. Thanks for watching.